Hi everyone. It's Tuesday, February the 16th as I'm recording this, and tonight I'm going to post your first exam. And so this little video is just to give you a few tips to prepare you for taking the exam. The suggested due date for the test is next Monday to turn that in. If you need to take a few days beyond that, that's okay. It's not a big deal. If you think it's going to be more than 1 week late when you turn it in, please write to me and let me know because you might need to take a different form of the exam. I encourage you to try to get this done on time if you can, just because next week we will be moving on to Unit 2 and you'll want to be ready to move on if you can. But don't worry about it if it takes you a couple of extra days. Okay, so I want to start with just a couple brief clarifications of factual material from Unit 1, a few things that have come up as I've been looking at the discussion forums and the assignments. The first thing I want to address has to do with climate change, and specifically the relationship of climate change to the ozone hole. Now, both of these are very famous environmental problems that people have had to deal with over the past few decades. But the question is, can we say that the ozone hole causes climate change? Can we say that climate change causes the ozone hole? Now, sometimes students will say this. For the purposes of my class, I'd say it's best to think of these as two separate problems that have different causes and basically different solutions. So just to quickly go through the differences between the main causes of climate change and the main causes of the ozone hole. So global warming, that specific part of climate change, comes from the buildup of greenhouse gases in the lower part of our atmosphere. And the buildup of those greenhouse gases acts as kind of a thicker and thicker blanket that keeps the planet getting warmer and warmer. The number one greenhouse gas that causes the problems is carbon dioxide. Methane is another important one. Now, to make life confusing, ozone actually is a greenhouse gas, but it's not causing the problem of global warming to the same extent that carbon dioxide and methane are. So we don't really talk about ozone so much when we're talking about the greenhouse gases that cause global warming. When you think about ozone and the ozone hole, we're talking there about ozone that's located in the stratosphere, which is a higher part of the atmosphere. And up in the stratosphere, ozone protects us from the ultraviolet rays of the sun. Ultraviolet rays that, for example, could cause skin cancer, they can interfere with plant photosynthesis. The ozone is a protective layer that's up there. So we need the ozone up in the stratosphere to protect us from the UV rays of the sun. And back, really like when I was a child, there were chemicals that people were putting up into the air from refrigeration, aerosols, hairsprays, shaving cream, stuff like that, that through a complicated series of chemical stages would end up damaging the ozone layer up in the stratosphere. And to the point where a hole actually started appearing in the ozone layer annually, basically above Antarctica, and there's reasons why that's the location and the timing of it. So scientists realized that this was dangerous, that it was a problem, and countries of the world actually got together and enacted something called the Montreal Protocol in the 1980s that phased out the production of the chemicals that were damaging the ozone layer and causing the ozone hole. And although it's taking a while to fully repair that hole, in general, the protocol has been quite successful in allowing the ozone to repair itself. So a lot of people point to this as a success story in human beings getting together and doing something to protect the environment. Now, there are some complicated interactions between the ozone layer and global warming. For example, as greenhouse gases lower in the atmosphere blanket the planet more and more, because they're trapping heat closer to the Earth, that can actually make the stratosphere, which is higher up, get colder. And when the stratosphere gets colder for complicated reasons, that tends to facilitate the damage of ozone and can make the ozone hole get bigger. So potentially there are some interactions between climate change and the ozone hole. So when students say that one may cause the other, it's not that it's completely wrong, it's just that that's not accounting for the main causes of the ozone hole and the main causes of climate change. So anyhow, I hope that made sense to you. If you want more clarifications, I'll post some links up underneath the exam. So if you want to go read more about ozone and climate change, specifically whether there are relationships between them or not, you can do that. Okay, so then the next thing I wanted to address comes from this second assignment, specifically respiration of organisms in forests. So people usually think about, when we think about the interaction between photosynthesis and respiration, a lot of people think, well, human beings and animals breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide, while plants are taking in carbon dioxide and giving off oxygen. Isn't that convenient how we sort of complement one another? But sometimes people don't realize that plants also perform respiration, which uses oxygen and can give off carbon dioxide. So it's just good to make a note of that, and also to realize that microorganisms in the soil are performing respiration where they need oxygen and give off carbon dioxide. You can actually put a measuring instrument on the soil of the forest floor and quantify how much carbon dioxide is coming up from the respiration of the microorganisms. So imagine that you wanted to go beyond simply saying, okay, a forest sequesters carbon, and you wanted to quantify exactly how much. If you were a scientist on that level, you'd have to come up with a pretty complicated model that sort of balances the photosynthesis of the plants with the respiration of all the different organisms that are around in the forest as well. And that's not a level that we'll get to in this class, but I just wanted to kind of tip you off that that's out there. And some of you who go on in the sciences will definitely encounter those things at a later point. Let's move now to a few tips on how to approach the exam, and specifically the essay question on the exam. You'll also have multiple choice and true-false, but I'm sure you know how to approach those on your own. So I'm just asking you to write one essay question. You have two options to choose from. I won't read them out loud, but here they are. The first one has to do with forests and sea level rise, and the second option has to do with ways in which deforestation harms the planet and people. So you'll choose one of these two, and then write an essay that's nicely structured and detailed. So starting with a few general tips, first of all, when you write, please do focus on materials from my class. It's fine to throw in a few things that you remember from high school or from your personal experience, but I want to be sure that you've really integrated things that we've read and discussed together in my course. So most of the material in your essay should come from this class. Then, if you draw information directly from one of the readings for this course, just be sure to give the author's name so that the author is getting proper credit, but you don't need to write out a full bibliographic citation for this essay. You will be for your Unit 3 research project, but not yet. If you make reference to things that I've discussed in my YouTube lectures, you don't need to put in any sort of citation to my lecture. You can just use that material without citing me. Then, because these essays are pretty short, I encourage you not to use direct quotations, like in quotation marks. Just put things into your own words. So if you're discussing articles from the class, just paraphrase what the authors are saying in your own words. Then, if you work with a friend, which I encourage you to do, just be sure that when you write the final version of your essay, that your essay is in your own words and your own writing style, and your friend's essay is in their own words and their own writing style, and don't copy sentences directly from one another. Then finally, I'm asking you to write at least 400 words. And, the most common thing I take off some points for on these essays is when students simply don't reach the full word count. So if you write a good essay, but it's only 250 words, you will lose some points for it not being long enough. So be sure to use the word count on your software program to see how many words you've written, and I'll give you a couple tips in a moment as to how to be sure that it's long enough. And, knowing how to write something that's a certain number of words is actually a really good professional skill to have. If you ever do presentations where you have to write a short abstract, the abstract usually has a very specific word count. If you write something like an article for a newspaper or a letter to the editor of a publication, oftentimes there's the word count on that. So you're just learning to get a sense of what 400 words feels like is a good professional skill to gain. Now, if you structure your essay in the classic 5-paragraph essay format, that'll help you to get up to that 400-word count, because your 5-paragraph essay includes an introduction and includes a conclusion, and those can take up a fair number of the words that you have to write. So this isn't the only way to write a successful essay, either for my class or for other people's classes, but the 5-paragraph essay is kind of a tried and true strategy for exam essays in college. You may have learned this format actually in high school English classes as well. So I'm just recommending it as a simple way to fulfill this requirement, and kind of a handy tool to have in your toolbox for future classes too. So how does the 5-paragraph essay work? The first paragraph is your introduction. The last paragraph is your conclusion, and then you've got 3 paragraphs in the middle that are the body of the paper. And if I was writing a 400-word essay in this format, I'd probably give about 50 words to the intro, 50 words to the conclusion, and then 100 words apiece to each of the 3 paragraphs in the body. Okay, so what goes into each of these sections? In the introduction, you want to catch your reader's attention, introduce the central topic and why it matters. This could take the form of what's called a thesis statement, which concisely formulates your main argument. I also like for the introduction to give what I think of as a quick roadmap of the body of the essay, just showing you in a quick sketch where you're going to be headed in the body of the paper, what the main points will be of each of the 3 paragraphs in the body of the paper. Now, in your introduction, you don't want to introduce very much detail yet. You don't really want to start getting into the material that you're teaching your reader and that you're using as the evidence for your main arguments. You want to save that for the body of the paper. So the introduction is just to kind of whet the reader's appetite and set the stage for what's about to come. Okay, then once your introduction is done, you move into the body of the paper, and the body is where you really present a lot of facts and a lot of evidence for your main arguments. I suggest a body of 3 paragraphs, and I've constructed the essay questions so that it's very easy to break them down into 3 main points. In each paragraph, you want to develop one central point. You want facts and evidence to support a main argument. You want good reasoning, logical conclusions that you're drawing, using critical thinking to develop persuasive arguments, and all that good kind of stuff that you do in good writing. Then in between each paragraph, in between one paragraph and the next, be sure that you have good transitions. Pay attention to the last sentence of each paragraph, the first sentence of each paragraph. Be sure that you're not kind of leaping around in ways that don't make sense. Make sure that the whole thing has a nice flow from one paragraph to the next. Okay, so the body is really the, where you present your main material, your main evidence, your main facts, your main arguments. Then at the end, in your 5th paragraph, you will come to your conclusion. And in the conclusion, don't be afraid to restate the main points that you've already made. Some repetition is totally appropriate for your conclusion. You might even do something like make a reference back to questions that you raised in the introduction to kind of tie the whole thing together from the beginning to the end. So you repeat your take-home points, but vary the wording a little bit from what you've said before so that it stays interesting. And then, like the introduction, this is not the place to introduce new information. If you get to the conclusion and you realize there's new information that you still want to say, then go back and put that into the body of the essay somewhere. But in your conclusion, you really just want to reinforce the take-home points. And remember that the conclusion is the last thing that the reader will remember. So what do you most want to kind of linger in their mind as they're finishing your essay? Okay, so again, this is just one good strategy for approaching an exam essay. If you do this for my class, it should work out pretty well. There are other ways to do it where you can get full credit. It doesn't have to be a 5-paragraph essay that you write, but I do recommend it. and it's good practice for future classes. All right, so I hope that this video was helpful to you, and please let me know if you have questions as you write the exam. Good luck with it, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.